I call the Honourable Member Nanaia Mahuta. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. We have heard on this debate of the camera surveillance temporary measures bill, minister after minister after minister justify why it is necessary. They've not justified to members of the House why they're rushing it through. They've not justified how the civil liberties of Kiwis who are listening to this debate feel about this type of legislation being rushed through. And to put a fine point on it, members of Parliament only received this bill just before the dinner break. Incredible. So even though we're told that there have been many iterations of the bill, members of Parliament have only received it just before the dinner break, and we're concerned, Mr Speaker, because true to form, Mr Mapp gave a very precise legal rationale for why the bill is being introduced. But I tell you what, Kiwis listening to the debate out there, they're wondering how these civil liberties are being affected. And they've got some real concerns, Mr Speaker. And the concerns that we're raising in the House are really the types of issues that I think that we should continue to ensure that the public are heard on such an important bill. Because Labor believes that we need to test the extent of the government's call to introduce retrospective legislation, precisely the extent to which retrospective powers apply. On principle, I actually believe that there is a very high threshold that must be passed if retrospective legislation can even be entertained. And I'm not convinced by any argument that has been raised by government members in the House as to what that is. We don't know how many cases we're talking about. Well, that might be the case, but members have asked time and time again, and we need to know the exact reasons for why retrospective legislation should be introduced. The other point I might make, by the way, is that this is a temporary measure. This is a temporary measure. So if it's such an important bill, why don't we look for the type of solution that has broad parliamentary consensus, that isn't a temporary bill, and that actually cuts to some of the core issues. So we need to test the extent of the government's call to introduce retrospective legislation. We do need to test the government's assertion about the existing cases that would be released if these law changes did not go ahead. We need to challenge the rushed manner that the government is proposing to push through these law changes. And I say again, on principle, I believe that retrospective legislation to sanction the long arm of the law is not good lawmaking in itself and must be scrutinised thoroughly by Parliament. It concerns me that members across the rest of the House have gotten up unanimously and not only expressed their concerns but expressed their opposition to what the government is here trying to do today. Mr Speaker, all is said and done. People listening to the debate need to be aware that the bill that we're discussing was tabled just before the dinner break tonight, and it's important for the bill to go through a select committee process to assure transparent and public scrutiny on the issues being raised in the House tonight. There is nothing to gain if the bill falls victim to political spin doctoring by the government, which wedges good lawmaking and more criminals in the public domain. If that's the wedge that this government is spinning to rush this law through, then it's not. It doesn't give the public confidence. It certainly doesn't give me confidence. Because every politician in this House advocates very strongly for safer communities, but we cannot fudge political judgment with good law making and good law enforcing to achieve that outcome. Mr Speaker, there is a clear misfit with those objectives in this bill, and political parties across the House have highlighted several deficiencies in the government's argument. I'm concerned about the lack of public transparency and accountability on such an important issue, such as search and surveillance powers of the police. The public and Māori are all the more wary of police powers because of the excessive manner in which the Tūhoe raids were carried out. New Zealand is a small country made up of small communities of people who, by and large, want to lead safe and peaceful lives. They trust the police to do their job and carry out their responsibilities with the support of the law. Kiwis are concerned if Parliament seeks to change the law retrospectively to sanction unlawful actions of the police. It is a matter of trusting our law enforcers, yes. It is a matter of civil liberties of Kiwi citizens, yes. And it is about lawmaking. It is not about rushing through the types of proposals that the government is making tonight in a rushed manner through our parliamentary process. Labor wants the bill, yes, to go to Select Committee for very good reasons. I'm pleased that Labor has not given a free pass to the government to ram through legislation to ensure that the public have a say on this very important matter. I'm concerned, like Green Party members actually, that the haste in progressing this matter through a Select Committee process will not build confidence, public confidence in the lawmaking process, and the government needs to carry the entire burden of that criticism. Now, I've also heard arguments from government members that by not making the change now means more crimes will be committed. Well, I doubt very much whether that will be the case, and the government is not in a position to prove that statement. But they shouldn't make those types of statements to fearmonger people into supporting their position. I've also heard from the government that criminals currently in jail are the real targets for the proposed changes. Well, it's my strong view that rather than fear-mongering the good citizens of New Zealand, the government should clarify the extent, as I said before, to which retrospective powers are necessary, if at all. I'm very concerned about this single issue. Parliamentarians do not have any detailed information about how many cases that require the types of changes that are being called for. In part, a Select Committee process will be an opportunity to penetrate the legislative motivations for law changes like the ones being proposed tonight. Labor have played a constructive role in the Search and Surveillance Bill, which has not been given any priority by the government on its order paper. Both my colleagues Charles Chauvel and David Parker have outlined a starting point to work through some of those issues. But let's be under no shadow of a doubt that we in the Labor Party favour a thorough Select Committee process where the public have an opportunity to consider any proposed law change of this significance. Mr Speaker, I am concerned, like many others, that a rushed law is a bad law. This is an important issue that intersects with civil liberties and the extent of lawful actions of the police. The government should consider the timing of this legislation, and rather than drive a wedge against every political party in this House, it should seek a broader consensus that tackles the issues that Labor have put centre front before the government tonight. Mr Speaker, I don't support the bill in its current form. I have some very severe reservations. I'm wary of a rushed process. I'm challenged by any argument which proposes retrospective law changes to police powers because my gut tells me to think again. Mr Speaker, through all of that, I do have faith in the public scrutiny of the Select Committee process, common sense, and ensuring that time plays its part. There were members in the House that made the comment that the perception of this law being rushed through in such a manner is targeted to one specific event. Mr Speaker, my main concern is that perceptions aside, the government takes heed of all the concerns that have been raised by members of Parliament, because we reflect actually not the legal minds in the House, but the public sentiment and will of people, normal people in our communities, and those people who suffered the long arm of the law when powers were used at an excessive level out there in Tūhoe, I think deserve our erring on the side of caution to ensure at the forefront of any decision-making that we're trying to address tonight in relation to the powers of the police, that the retrospective powers are a matter of such significant issue that we're not going to treat it lightly and ram through the House. Secondly, that there is greater information to the public about the reasoning and justifications of the government for trying to propose anything. But thirdly, and most importantly, that we look for a long-term solution and not a temporary measure. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Simon Bridges.
Speaker, I have